Greetings and good evening, and welcome to The Gutter. Everyone ends up here eventually. Now, tonight, due to some scheduling conflicts, this episode has been pre recorded before a live studio audience. Our guest this week is Raiden Radio. Raiden Radio, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good. Ahoy, ahoy. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Welcome to The Gutter. I'm not sure if that's a positive or a negative yet. I'll let you decide at the end of the show. But with introductions out of the way, we're going to be talking about two things. One of them is pretty special. The other is your book, How to Die Too, that'll be launching later this year. The book that we're going to be kind of comparing and contrasting, I guess, talking about our experiences with, is the Eerie collection of The Hunter. You had a chance to check this out, Raiden. What were your initial takeaways?
So the first thought I had is that it's I'm being honest, it was my first read. But it's one of those rare books that is going to change the way I write. You know what I mean? Like it kind of like set off like a cascade of like of like what's possible, what can be done in hybrid storytelling. And yeah, it just kind of it made me think of like all the things I can do, and it's just one of those books that's just gonna be like, wow, I'm not gonna write the same way again after having read this.
Wow, that's fantastic, man. Many would consider this as not very good. I have always disagreed with that. I hold Hunter in very high regard. Eerie had a lot of their own IPs that were serialized throughout the full run of the comic or the magazine, and this one always has stood out to me as one of the high points throughout the full run. But when you're talking about dystopian fiction, it comes in many forms, and I don't think anything is more engaging than that that's rooted in the post-apocalyptic wastelands and destitute, broken urban landscapes. And that's exactly what you get with Hunter. Whether it's the Rocky Mountains bathed in the midst of a nuclear irradiated winter, or the failed germination attempts of civilization trying to rebound, this book's got it all, man. And it's arguably an epic story of the son of a mutant demon general and a human mother. He's a half breed warrior who kind of fights for humanity and kind of for himself to a degree too, against the hordes of darkness, the hordes of the demons. He's a hero that stands apart in that classic trope sense, and that he fights for that which does not embrace him. So I mean, would you agree with all that for the most part, right?
Yeah, and what's okay, so here's what's kind of interesting. I mentioned that it was a book, one of those books that changes the way I write. Um, Another one of those books is Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. I always bring up Cormac McCarthy, but his most celebrated book is called The Road.
Yes.
And even though he's one of my favorite authors, I absolutely loathe that book because just in general, like dystopian fiction, it's like I'm really not interested in considering the ramifications of post-apocalyptic Earth. Like that just doesn't seem fun. There's nothing fun about that. But with Hunter, the language and just the way it's paced, where you just jump like right into it. It doesn't wallow in misery. You know what I mean? So you come in like a punch to the mouth, right? And you get the pieces, like they're like breadcrumbs that are sprinkled into the story. But because it has your attention and it gives you like an actual story to focus on, you're not just wallowing into the misery that is dystopian future. And it just kind of gives it to you a little bit at a time, and it just makes the whole experience a lot more palatable as a reader.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the things that stands out about Hunter is how character driven it is. A lot, and you kind of mentioned this. A lot of dystopian stories really lean heavy on the setting as a crutch to get you through certain things or for believability. This kind of throws believability out the window, and it's just a character story, and the backdrop is this dystopian realm. And actually, moving forward, the Hunter series is actually three distinct stories. There's Hunter 1, Hunter 2, and then kind of sort of Hunter 3. And I don't even think we're going to talk about Hunter 3. It's more of a spoof than anything else and really doesn't fit with what Hunter 1 and Hunter 2 were. They're also certainly products of their time. The villains are fairly one-dimensional. There's not a lot of depth in a lot of those, but some of the storytelling is quite engaging, and all of the stories have a distinct brand of nasty about them that is just beautiful. That almost was done better in the 70s, I think, than any other time for whatever reason. Probably just the general self-loathing of those people being alive during the 70s. But
Mm-hmm.
so Damian Hunter, the half man, half demon, is our main character. Now, before we start showing some pages here, what were your impressions of the art overall?
So one of the things I've never really, no, one of the things I've never really been all that into is that kind of zine look. You know what I mean? Where it's just like it kind of rides the line between, um, I don't know, it a lot of times comes off as like kind of lazy. Like this can look like crap, and it's okay because it's supposed to. Um, but like so much thought went into like the layout, how everything looks, how everything kind of leads your eye, that I found it to be like, despite the fact that it doesn't, it's ugly, like it's ugly by design, but at the same time, it's just really easy to follow. I could be wrong, but like, because like obviously art is not my forte, but I just found it to be like a really satisfying perspectives and like how this kind of shift from page to page. I just found it to be really great.
No, I think again, man, I love this book. I love these stories. So, I really like the art. It's got a real heavy ambience to it. It's not heavy-handed, but it's there, and it's got a touch of stylized flair, like you were talking about. The panel layouts are unique in how they're structured and how the pages goes through. And we'll be pulling up some pages here shortly. Just to go through a little bit of the history and the publication of this story in the magazine. It was drawn by more than one artist, and it was written by more than one writer. The first story of Hunter, kind of the the debut, so to speak, was by Rich Margopoulos and drawn by Paul Neary. Neary would be the artist that worked on it for the majority of the run, and those were the first three stories were done in Eerie issues 52, 53, and 54. Now we're going to be going through the full run. I'll be showing you the magazine covers for each one as we kind of just briefly talk about them. Um, the collection that we reviewed for reference, it's about 232 pages. It retails for anywhere from $12 to $30, depending. It's fairly easy to find. It's a nice hardbound volume. I do encourage you to pick it up. I wouldn't pay more than 25 for it. Most all the Eerie issues that we'll be referencing, complete range depending on condition. Some of them low end 6 to 8, high end 25 to 30. They're all very affordable if you do want to get the original publicated pages on any of these. So the first one, like I said, was broke up in three parts. Those were first one was January of 1974. The last one was March of 1974. So January, February, and March 74 is when the the first three parts of the story come out. Following that, issue 55 is semi-famous because of its cover. This is actually the cover that was on the collected work. This is drawn by Ken Kelly. Ken Kelly would continue to do several of the other covers when Hunter would make it onto the cover of Eerie. And issue 55, in addition to seeing Ken Kelly do the cover, was also the first that Bud Lewis took over. Bud Lewis wrote my favorite stories in this for sure. Lewis had a very eclectic career. He was a screenwriter, a film designer, a special effects operator, as well as a comic scripter for Warren. Following the bankruptcy of Eerie and Creepy, he moved up to Oregon and had not a penny to his name. Excuse me. And ended up running a hot dog stand until his death. He was very destitute up there in that area. So that was, it's kind of a shame, but those things happen. Also, his life was saved on the set of Roger Corman's Battle Beyond the Stars by a very young James Cameron. He got a really deep cut and was bleeding out. And if Cameron's first aid knowledge from being a fireman in Canada actually saved his life. So Bud Lewis kind of took over at issue 55 and kind of steers the majority of the series after that. Did you notice much of a shift between Rich Margopolis and Bud Lewis's stories?
I didn't, but that doesn't surprise me because genuinely, or generally speaking, it takes me like at least two read throughs. Like the first read through is really just a flyover, um, and I kind of worry now that you said that I'm going to notice it on my second read through.
I'm sorry.
But
So
Richard Margopoulos, I'm looking for like I'm just from how stylized the language is. I was expecting to like Google him and find that like oh, he became a screenwriter, but like I can't find much.
no, and that's the thing. A lot of the guys that wrote for Eerie and Creepy, I mean, they also republished a lot of stuff from the pre-EC pre-code days. But a lot of the guys that wrote for him ended up just drifting off and doing whatever. A few stayed in comics, but there's a lot of them that they just drift away. There's a lot of artists here that worked on covers for Eerie and Creepy, and I'm sure we'll probably do a gutter on that coming up at some point. That really aren't even comic or pinup artists. They're advertising guys. They're illustrators. Warren did a lot of interesting things and reached out to a lot of different corners because they were trying to save every nickel they possibly could. This magazine was an attempt to do what they could on as low of a budget as humanly possible at times. So, but yeah, so we've got Lewis taking over on issue 55. And then we have issues 56 and 57. There's Bill Dubé steps in. And then issue 67 sees Lewis return. And issue 67 is when Hunter 2 graces the cover for the first time. So I'm not going to get too much into spoilers, but there's a reason there's Hunter 1, Hunter 2, and then the Hunter 3 that we will not speak of. So issue 67 sees the return. Again, that's Ken Kelly. Issue 68 sees the Hunter 2 series continue, still under Lewis and Neary. You've got issue 69, which again has Hunter on the cover. This is by the talented San Julian, who did quite a few covers for Eerie and Creepy. And then issue 72 as well was also his pen work with Hunter on the cover. And then issues 70 and 71, between those two, saw more work from Lewis and Neary. Issue 73 saw Ken Kelly return with another Hunter 2 with Lewis. This was Lewis's last story, second to last story. Issue 87 is the issue that we don't really speak of. This is with Alex Nino and Jim Stenstrom taking over the scripting. And it's more of a spoof on the Hunter story. Lewis would close out the series with issue 101. And then original scriptwriter Rich Margopoulos would return with art by Al Sanchez in issue 121 for a Hunter Darklon crossover story. So with kind of getting that history down, at least you kind of get a run of the issues. Did you have anything to add before we start kind of looking at going through some of the art or anything?
Do you know why they decided to like spoof it, or I guess take the piss out of it? Was it just not performing, or it wasn't received?
No, it was received well. The issue is Hunter 1 and Hunter 2 were encapsulated stories that end distinctly. And for whatever reason, they didn't want to take an anthology approach where they look from one end to the other and go like, oh, we could tell a story before this or after this. They just did their storytelling, and then we got the spoof. And they did that occasionally with some of their stuff. I think a lot of it has to do with just a lack of understanding of branding at the time. Again, they were doing well, but not as well as they wanted. So I think they were also looking for filler work at times. But this is the this is the first page. This is the first page of the first issue of Margopoulos and Neary's work. You'll immediately see the stark layout issues that Raiden was speaking of, and you really get the sense from, and I think the use of Zipatone here is just, it stands right out at you with how he uses the light and the dark and how contrasting it is. And the thing that you'll see repeatedly in Neary's work is that great understanding of how black and white should operate. And it's
To go
just
back, what do you think of? I guess you wouldn't even call it a font on the word hunter. What do you think of that choice for the?
well, it's the 70s, man. I mean, you're gonna see this. You'll see this a lot if you look at Wizards. If you look at where Wizards was derived from, which was the late 60s work of Von Bodie with Cheech Wizard, you'll see typography similar to this. I cough it up to the era more than anything else, than any kind of a stylized choice. If you look at the actual the collected works, they went with more of a weathered hunter that's almost reminiscent of a 2000 AD block style letter. I think that's probably a better choice than what
Yeah.
they've got in the original issues. But I think again, there's a lot of hunter that is like I mentioned, is certainly a product of its time, and for better or worse, you're left with that. So as we go through some of these pages, you'll see again what Raiden was talking about. Now, one of the things that I'm surprised you didn't mention that is often a huge critique of these is how wordy they are. You've got stylized panel layouts that they don't traditionally break traditional rules, but they certainly stretch them. And there's certain moments where you'll see pages like this. And this is page 3, and Eerie does something here that's just astounding. He leaves almost the top third of the page blank, with just a little bit of touch of something in the lower right-hand corner. And there's something to be said for this. It really accentuates the writing of this. And in a lot of ways, comics are show, don't tell. This is kind of pushing that limit, but it's the art makes it work because the writer is doing such a good job. Rich does an excellent job in his pacing and his structure on this issue, in my opinion. I don't know what your takeaway was.
I mean, like if you were to count the amount of adjectives on any page, like I want it's a bonanza, and I love it.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, you've got and this continues, as I'm not going to go through every page of the issue, but just the style again, man. You hit the nail on the head when you talked about the panel layouts and the structure and the layering. It's done to such expert levels here that it's just truly a shame that more people don't see this. And the use of heavy black is just fantastic. You really get that sense of shadow and isolation. This panel with Hunter screaming is probably one of my favorites in the first story. I don't know why. It just hits, man. When you're reading it, that's got some emotion behind it. And we get just continued great action sequences. The action sequences are paced well. And again, I think we talked a little bit about this in the last episode with Nefarious about the Savage Sword of Conan action sequences, which were notorious for doing a four shot, and then the next follow-up shot would be a reversal. So you really got the feel that there was action and motion. And again, you see that here on the top of this page where you get one angle and then a reverse angle. And you'll see that time and time again in Eerie's work, where he's really using that sense of changing the camera, quote unquote, to get a little bit of action into the page and just push that a little bit harder.
So I know I'm focusing a lot on words because it's kind of what I do, but it was, yeah, I think I mentioned something to you last week about how absolutely grueling it is to read Stan Lee's dialogue.
Yes, indeed.
But like when he would have, those blurbs in every issue that was describing what's happening and he's describing the action, he does it in a way that's like so over the top. And I think that like that's really where he shined. And that's what like 99% of everything written in this book is just like the most bombastic, over the top descriptions. And even like the dialogue, it doesn't feel, it doesn't have that kind of, Stan Lee thing where like somebody throws a steel girder and the character says he threw a steel girder at me, and you can see it happening, and you're just saying what's happening in the panel.
Right.
It avoids that. Yeah. So it doesn't have that, but it has all of those better, like I would call it, I'm just going to invent a term, salesmanship narration, where it's selling you the book as it's describing it.
Ooh, I like that. That's good. When you talk about Stan though, and his style of dialogue writing and his pacing, to step away a little bit from Hunter here before we return, I always thought this summed it up the best.
Yeah.
With this to me, you can look at any Stan issue from the late '60s to the mid '70s, and just this sums it right up.
Mm.
Really, the mid '60s to the early '70s, but yeah, it's just the shocking tales of redundancy
Yeah.
was exactly what Stan would do. Neary does something on this page that I did want to highlight, and that's he's actually got he broke his action sequence down into 3 quick shots, and he's well aware of what he's doing, to the point that he puts film strips on the side
Yeah.
of it to
Yeah.
indicate it. That's just
That's so great.
and it's out of nowhere. You
Yeah.
don't see this before. It just drops in, and then they move on, and we're not going to do it again. So it's very inventive, and it's very almost chaotic in its structure and its layout, and you do get the impression of
Hang
that
on, go back a
zine.
second. The drawing, I think it was like a drawing of Oblivion. Like I was just staring
Oh
at that for
yeah,
like for a really long time. Like Oblivion. Okay, so that's like, what do you even call that? Like what the artist imagines Oblivion to look like?
yeah, yeah. These are something else. And the more you read them, the more you flip through. Every time you catch something different. They're really detail heavy for what they are, and for just being pen and ink or brush and ink, depending on which artist worked. The depth is really impressive. And there's something else, man. There's a ton of hidden gems like this that are laying around that just you don't take it into account. The zombies here, or the ghouls, however you want to describe them, are just fantastic, with the open rib cages with the inky blackness
Mm.
behind them. It's just, again, it's the depth. There's just a fantastic feel to this book, and the backgrounds are just gorgeous with that nice stippled pattern. It's this book is something else. I highly recommend it, even if it's normally not your bag. This is the kind of thing I think a lot of young artists should be looking at, because Neary does a lot of really fun stuff with a little bit of tongue in cheek too. So we've got more of that wonderful font that you brought up. So yeah, it's a fantastic series. I can't emphasize that enough on how much I enjoy it. And yeah, it is a little heavy on the wording, maybe in a modern sense, but they're meant to be read too, guys. So you got to have a little bit of story, and a good writer can make wording like this just flow beautifully, and it does here, especially when you get into some of Lewis's stuff.
It's also kind of amazing how like the art is able to extract realism from darkness. You know what I
Oh,
mean? Like
that's a
this,
good point. Yeah.
yeah. Like how they're, I don't know, it's not detailed, and yet it looks, all of like the figures and the expressions and the poses look very realistic.
hmm Well, and you'll see a couple of throwbacks to this. The gentleman's face down here on the bottom. It's kind of a throwback to the EC style. They know what they're kind of going for. They know their audience. So it's just something else. That rocket shot I love, and that's the other thing, is his angles on some of the perspectives are just fantastic. You get a great sense of depth and how big this rocket is based off of that. And whether you want to call it like Kirby
Yeah, I was gonna
architecture
say
or
Kirby.
whatever, you certainly get that. But then you get
The
this wonderful
checkerboard.
checkerboard pattern. Yes, that's just, why is it there? Well, who cares? It gives it great depth. And it's just over and over again, you see the complete understanding of the medium that the artist is working in. And yeah, it's just
I'm not
great.
an artist, but if somebody told me I needed to draw like an upward angle of a stone spiral staircase, I'd be like, get the fuck out of here.
Right.
I'm not doing that.
So this is the first issue of Hunter 2, which is the follow-up to Hunter 1 that we previously mentioned. And you get a nice light expositionary introduction, and then we just jump right into the story. And again, its pacing is a little bit different than everything before this, but it moves quicker than you think it would. And it's just I don't know, it's something special for sure. I'm really glad to hear. What was it? Because you mentioned that it changed how you're going to write. What was it explicitly about this that changed that motivation?
I mean, I think it's a little bit of like epic camp where I don't know. I was just reading, all of these descriptors and all of this, and I'm just thinking to myself, like, maybe it's okay to write like that. Like, it's okay to be, bombastic and just, completely over the top in how you describe things. Like, maybe I don't have to be, focused on, ultra realistic. Like, what would this? How would this actually be described? What would this actually look like? It's okay to like just kind of lose yourself and just call things, because I'm pretty good. I'm a pretty good, guy with an adjective. So yeah, it just made me think about that for the future of like, how am I going to describe things?
Gotcha. Very good.
Like,
Now, is there?
like when I can't remember where it was exactly in the first book, but it was like, you know, describing something as ink black, knowing that it's going to be inked black.
Right. Yes.
That's
There's
just great. And plus, like, you could just get lost counting the alliteration in this book.
yes. Well, and I'm a huge fan of good alliteration, and I think there's a long-standing comic history of that. Obviously, when you talk about Bruce Banner or Peter Parker, there's even Clark Kent. It's not necessarily always about the letter.
Coleman Carmichael.
There you go. But yeah, it's not always about the lettering. Sometimes it's just about the phonetic sound. And you can play around with that a lot as a writer because a lot of people, when they read as if they're reading in their head. They're not reading. I don't know. It's hard to describe the difference in how you read aloud, read internally, or read for enjoyment. But there's been some discussion on that in psychological circles that sometimes you can utilize the phonetic phrasing of something to elicit something more when someone's reading to themselves versus reading aloud because they're not going to catch it. The brain processes it a little bit different. So, and that's certainly done. I think Megopoulos does it a little bit more than Lewis. Lewis is kind of just an in-your-face guy. It's just the story's there. But either way, it's quite enjoyable. So I was pleased that you. That's fantastic that it actually changed how you approach your writing. That's an awesome response to something like this.
The other thing I was thinking, and I don't know how I don't want to like completely throw another book under the bus, but after about 3 pages, the thought that I had was that this book is what Bullet Maker wished it was. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. I'm not going to respond to that because
Okay.
that doesn't need any air. But yes, that is a brilliant way to put it, I think. And you got to at the same time, there's something to be said for this, and it's the idea that when you are writing something, if you have a grand idea, something that's really epic that you think is like going to be what you want to really put your all into, don't do that one first. Do a couple other things first. Before you ever do your magnum opus, so to speak, because it takes a long time to get to understand how to write for a comic, for how to write for sequential art, and how to engage a reader. And it takes a lot of failures along the way before you're going to learn those trades. And well, for you yourself, I mean, you're on your How to Die 2 is going to be your 5th book, right?
Yeah.
So you did Eudaimonia 1 and 2 first. I never got a chance to read Eudaimonia 2. Eudaimonia 1 is breathtaking in its beauty. It's almost not a book. It's almost like just a pictorial poem in a way. It just flows so elegantly. Obviously, I'm not blowing smoke up your ass, but I mean it's up there with like Gustave Doré's etchings associated with Milton's Paradise Lost to me. It's got that direct association where it invokes a very emotional response. Especially that one shot, and I wish I should have grabbed it, of the cello just sitting on the chair. Like it was just stark. Now, How to Die, which is the precursor to the book that you've got coming out later this year, you've said in the past that it wasn't your best. Was there something that you tried to do that was different than what you did in Eudaimonia 1 and 2?
I think what I was trying to do was, after Eudaimonia 1 and 2 and having so many people, people really enjoyed it. I got lots of great feedback. I also heard plenty of like, this is weird, it's not for everybody. I tried to make a comic book, rather than just telling a story. And I think I do better when I just stick to like focus on the storytelling part of it and don't worry about producing what is considered a traditional comic book. So, you know, when I went to look for an artist, I kind of, listened to people in the community. Oh, you should get somebody from here. And I didn't do it the way I did it with Eudaimonia, where I just stayed focused on my vision and the story. I basically let, some weird ideal about making a comic book lead the way. And I didn't like anything about how it came out. And that includes like even the printing, because I had moved in between books and I had used Mixum, and I'm pretty sure Mixum just outsources to local printers. So I was getting a different printer.
Yes. Yep.
And
Yeah. Mixum is just a print, basically a print wholesaler. Yeah. They're a dealer. You issue them your job, and then they bid it out to a bunch of people, depending on what choices you have. If you pick a spot gloss cover, well, then they talk to these guys over here that are in their network that have spot gloss capability. If you don't, well, then it goes to all these guys. It's just all you're doing when you click those buttons is just changing what number of printers they're going to reach out to, and then you have no quality control, as multiple people have found out within the space. So,
yeah, so
um,
like Eudaimonia 1 and 2, it was like everything that happened. Like I got very lucky. Like everything that happened along the way happened in a very fortuitous way. That for when I went to make How to Die, I hadn't taught myself to say no. So all of those steps along the way, I get the books in the mail. I should have just like, emailed them and said, hey, this kind of sucks. Like this sucks. Like the book is dog-eared. It doesn't feel right. It doesn't look right. And I just didn't. And so I feel like I just delivered not a very good product to people. And so this campaign is really going to be me trying to make up for that and hoping that, people will come back.
Gotcha. Now, so following up on what arguably and self-admittingly was your worst book, you had Noirlam, which, in my opinion, is a return to where you were at in Eudaimonia 1, if not better than. You told a beautiful story. The art is gorgeous, and you had a publishing deal associated with that.
Yeah, I mean, I got lucky in the sense that I was able to kind of like corral the weird abstract storytelling and actually make a proper story that a publisher would at least consider putting their name on. Um, been really happy with how that all turned out. I've been I'm excited for the next one. That book is going to be in the works, and yeah, I couldn't be happier with it.
So, with How to Die being a stepping stone, a stumbling block that you learned from, and if we can take away the assumption that from what you learned from that went into Noirlam, what are you taking from your experience with Noirlam and your success there and putting into How to Die 2?
So, How to Die 2 is going to be it's going to continue from the first book, that it is very much a character study, but the gloves are basically coming off with trying to tell what is, a traditional comic book story. Um, it's going to be back to just being really weird. It's going to be back to, readers are going to have to interpret what things mean. It's not going to be, kind of the meaning of things isn't going to be spelled out as much. Um, but it's going to be back to what I consider to be like beautiful, gorgeous art, um, weird avant-garde storytelling, weird moments, characters, really just kind of like you said about Hunter, like it being like very character driven. That's what the How to Die series. That's what I basically learned, was that that's what the series should be focused on, is a series of character stories with, superpowers and psychic powers and demonic creatures and people dying and becoming undead. And yeah, I'm just going to try and deliver like a wild ride of good characterization.
So coming from that realm that you just described, what can you take away from a book like Hunter that you could pour into How to Die 2?
Absolutely nothing, because there's no narration in the How to Die in the How to
Okay.
Die world. Um,
No, that's fair, man.
yeah, I would say the weirdness comes from, it's more visual than anything. Like honestly, the closest thing to compare it to would be the Max, in that,
Okay.
you know how like you'd read an issue of the Max and you would realize at the very end that only the first and last pages actually take place in reality,
Right.
and everything else, like, you're not even sure, like, was any of that real?
Right. It all just
Um,
existed in headspace.
yeah, so like that's a lot of what it is, and it's basically surrealism, becoming a vessel for people talking about their problems and maturing and growing as people. If I'm being honest, that's a lot of what How to Die is. Like, it's really people kind of like coming to terms with changes in their world, or spiraling out of control, or these different things, and it just kind of plays out in, you know, a shape shifting creature slicing people in half, or a homeless schizophrenic that can, you know, is really like in reality is a monster, but makes herself look like a sexy goth chick in your perceptions of her.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you mentioned the Max, was that a big comic influence on you when you decided to try to write a comic?
I mean, okay, I would say it's number two, to Spider-Man, um, in the sense that, like, I tend to view comics not through the lens of like what makes them super, but what makes them relatable. And I just had never before I read the Max, I just never read a comic that was like that, where it was like, this is really just about, you know, things, stuff that we all go through, and like overcoming things, maturing, which is like, that's a lot of the themes that you see in Spider-Man. But I'd say, yeah, Spider-Man's still probably ahead of the Max.
Okay, so as a writer, what was it that about Spider-Man that resonates?
Um, I would say imagining what it was like to be a couple guys who were adults, who kind of grew up in a time where like a teenager as a concept didn't really exist. Or, you know what I mean? Like, that's like a new thing. Like, so they're coming out of a world where, you're a child, and then when you're old enough to work, you go to work and you're an adult. And channeling that into this kind of exploration of like what it means to be a teenager, what it means to not really feel like an adult, still feeling a little bit childish, and trying to navigate between those two worlds as you learn responsibility.
Okay. So would you say responsibility in and of itself is kind of an underlying theme in some of your writing? The exploration of that?
No, I mean, it's something I find fascinating, just to explore those different, like, responsibility is obviously a major thing, but like those different aspects of existence are just something that I kind of explore in my writing. And you had talked before about the Hunter as like an idea. What I kind of took from reading that, or I'm trying to find the words here. So I imagine writing as being like a bundle of ideas that you have as a writer. And I think the best kind of writing is writing in which the author is not interested in the reader understanding all of those ideas, that the writer feels comfortable to just kind of put them out there in his own way. And if the reader picks up on some, all, or none of them, it just is what it is. And I think bad writing comes from writers who are too worried about their reader understanding all of their ideas. So they hammer you over the head with them. I think good writing is just the free flow of ideas without a care in the world for whether or not the reader gets them all.
Okay, so kind of, do you subscribe then? Because I happen to agree with you on that. I think that's the best tack to take. Do you subscribe then to the David Lynch philosophy that I'm never going to explain anything and I just let the audience come up with their own interpretations?
Maybe the way I would put it would be the writing that is open to interpretation is the writing that we remember. It's the writing that we come back to and discuss and love. And sometimes people take away different things from them. Eudaimonia is something that's open to limitless interpretations about what the meaning of eudaimonia is for the characters and for the reader. I just think that's the kind of storytelling that lives on.
So what would be your ideal story? We talked earlier about if you have that. I talked earlier if you have that magnum opus, that grand story that you've always wanted to tell. Do you have something like that that's in the closet somewhere you're waiting to pull out?
No, I just want to tell as many stories as I can while I can.
So
um,
without having that, what motivates you? Where do these stories come from? Are they like daily experiences? You stop at the convenience store to get milk and you see something and it sparks an idea?
I mean, if I'm being honest, eudaimonia came from driving through middle America and just seeing like endless roads and big sky country. And I had the thought in my head of like, hey, I wonder what it would be like if we were out here and an old guy played the cello and nobody knew about it. And that was pretty much it. So like I don't really look at things in terms of there being an end. I just love telling stories, and I love that I have a small pocket of people on the internet who enjoy them enough to buy them sometimes.
Fantastic. So as a general takeaway, when you take a step back and look at Eudaimonia 1, Eudaimonia 2, How to Die 1, and Noirlam and your upcoming How to Die 2, what is there any one that stands out that you're the most proud of or that encapsulates anything that you'd like to harness more?
I think Eudaimonia, the series, probably, and it's going to one day include three. But I was able to pack so much of who I am as a person, and I'm kind of like I've just always been like super, I don't know, super into like emotions and feelings and how, and sympathy and empathy, that like that book is just that's me. And the very last page of book number one, um, the Harlem Hellfighter, the very last page of that book, it was a poem that I wrote called The Snowfall and the Street Lamps. And that's just me. Like that's me describing the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life, which is snow falling in the street lamps. That's it. So I would say definitely Eudaimonia 1 and 2 because it's just that is like 100% who I am.
I think that's pretty unique to say that your first two published works were the ones that really resonate with you the most. Can you are you planning on carrying any of that forward into other things, or are you leaving that isolated to that one series?
I would say probably leave it to that. Um, I mean, I always try to incorporate a little bit of my own personal like philosophy and feelings on things into books, but that series is just always going to be the most personal. Um, Eudaimonia 3 is basically going to be every published work I've ever had, um, that I didn't have the rights to publish myself. Just kind of, yeah. So everything that I got published in other publications that once they published it, the rights returned to me. So yeah, it's just going to be like every short story and poem that I ever got published. Um, of like tons of different genres, and it's gonna be like it's gonna have a different artist on each one. So hopefully I can make some relationships in the next year, maybe get some other people involved on it.
Very cool.
Bancroft. Bancroft.
Well, fantastic, my friend. I mean, I'm definitely on board. I am sorry I missed Eudaimonia 2 and How to Die. Perhaps for the benefit of myself that I missed How to Die, because I did not miss on Noirlam, and that was, as I've told you repeatedly, a fantastic story. I know there's some aspects of it that have been criticized as being pedantic, but man, the twist at the end was well received by both myself and Mrs. Aldis. So,
Thank you.
indeed, sir. Well, thank you for joining us in the gutter this evening. I hope your time was spent in an enjoyable fashion.
I'm so sorry. I totally thought, I didn't know if you were talking to me or the audience. I whiffed wildly on that one.
Good deal, my friend. Well, is there anything, any final takeaways, whether it's your body of work, your upcoming book, the link for the sign up is in the description, or Hunter that you'd like to kind of, pontificate on as we close this out?
I think I've said all that's been said about Hunter. I really do think that this is a fantastic show, and I hope that this is just these early episodes are the stepping stone into something grander, because I always enjoy talking to you and getting a little bit of wisdom on this medium that we love so much.
Indeed, my friend. Well, the feeling there is mutual. I've been blessed with some awesome guests here in the early days of the gutter as we get our feet underneath us and kind of get some kind of a standardized format moving forward. But I certainly appreciate you joining me this evening, and hope everybody looks forward to How to Die 2. So with that, I will close it out. Earlier, Raiden had mentioned that, he writes for himself and not for the audience. And he's in good company, because J.D. Salinger famously said, "I live to write, but I write for just myself and my own pleasure." And if there's any takeaway from this that I think any writer should take, it's that that's the tact they need to be on. Because when it comes to the greats, Raiden may not be among them, but Salinger certainly was. So with that, thank you for joining us in the gutter. Nobody wants to spend too much time here, even if they do always end up. So thank you and good night.
This is blood for blood and by the gallons. This is the old days, man, the bad days, the all or nothing days. They're back. There's no choices left.
still here? It's over. Go home. Go.